Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking the legal mechanics of ending a marriage in Pennsylvania. Think of this as your complete step-by-step roadmap. If you're trying to figure out how this whole system actually works, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to break the law down into clear, digestible pieces, so you know exactly what to expect from day one, right through to the finish line. But before we get into the nitty-gritty details, we have to ask the big question. How exactly do you navigate the often intimidating process of legally untying the knot in the Keystone State? Honestly, it can feel like a total maze of paperwork, strict timelines, and, a lot of complex legal jargon. But here's the secret. When you strip all that away, it's actually a highly structured process with very clear rules. So here's our roadmap for today. We're covering 5 main areas. 1. The gateway to divorce. 2. Grounds for legal dissolution. 3. The step-by-step process. 4. Dividing property and debt. And finally 5. Support and child custody. Let's get right into it. All right, starting with Section 1, the gateway to divorce, where we'll look at eligibility and costs. Okay, so the magic number on your screen right now is 6. That stands for the minimum consecutive months that at least one spouse has to live in Pennsylvania before even filing a divorce complaint. And guys, this is a hard, strict rule. But the good news is only one of you needs to meet it. If you've been living in PA for 6 months, you can file here, even if your spouse lives in a totally different state or, hey, even a different country. Now, a quick warning. The courts are pretty smart about people trying to game the system. You can't just go rent an apartment in Philadelphia for a weekend to get a favorable divorce. You absolutely must be a bona fide resident. Basically, that means you have a physical presence and a genuine intent to stay there indefinitely. Judges are going to look for objective proof of this, right? Things like a Pennsylvania driver's license, registering to vote, paying state taxes, or signing a long-term lease. Once you actually qualify to file, you'll need to pay the county filing fees. Pennsylvania is a bit unique here because every single county sets its own schedule, so the costs vary wildly. For instance, filing in Bucks County will set you back about $388. Meanwhile, out in Allegheny County, it's much lower, around $210. Now, if you're looking at those numbers and stressing out, don't worry, you aren't locked out of the system. Low-income filers can request what's called an in forma pauperis petition. If a judge approves it based on poverty guidelines, your filing fees are completely waived, $0. Moving on to Section 2, grounds for legal dissolution, focusing on fault versus no fault. So, you've got 2 primary pathways to actually end the marriage. On one side, there's fault-based divorce. This is where you actually have to prove marital misconduct, stuff like adultery, desertion, or cruel treatment. But honestly, almost everyone today just uses the no-fault option. Why? Because proving fault means dragging yourselves through highly adversarial, very public, and super expensive evidentiary hearings. No fault is just so much faster and way less emotionally destructive for everyone involved. Now, staying within that no-fault framework, you have 2 distinct choices. Option 1 is mutual consent. If you and your spouse both agree the marriage is, quote, irretrievably broken, you just wait 90 days after serving the complaint, sign some affidavits, and boom, you move forward. But what if your spouse flat out refuses to agree? Well, that's where the unilateral path comes in. You can absolutely still get a divorce without their permission, but the catch is you have to prove you've lived separate and apart for a mandatory, continuous 1-year period. This brings us to a really crucial point. What exactly does separate and apart mean in the eyes of the law? A lot of people think it automatically means signing a new lease and moving out. But actually, you can be legally separated while still living right under the same roof. The legal standard is simply the cessation of cohabitation. Pennsylvania courts are going to look at whether you've stopped acting like a married couple. Have you started sleeping in separate bedrooms? Did you stop sharing meals? Are your bank accounts untangled? Do you show up to social events solo? That's what they're looking for. All right, that brings us to Section 3, the step-by-step process. Let's talk forms, filing, and waiting. The actual procedure here flows in 4 main steps. Step 1, you file your initial complaint and a notice to defend. Step 2, and listen, this is a strict deadline, you have to serve your spouse within 30 days if they live in PA or 90 days if they're out of state. If you miss that window, your whole case stalls. Step 3 is completing that wait-in period we just talked about, so either 90 days or 1 year. And finally, Step 4. Once all the economic stuff is completely settled, you file a form with a wonderfully old-school legal name, the Praecipi to transmit the record. That's basically just formally asking the judge to sign your final divorce decree. Now, throughout all this, the state does require plaintiffs to include a notice of right to counseling in their paperwork. But it is incredibly important to point out that if domestic abuse is a factor, safety takes absolute priority. Organizations like the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence offer amazing, essential resources here. Plus, the law provides some serious protections. For instance, if your spouse has been convicted of a personal injury crime against you, their consent to the divorce is actually legally presumed. So victims do not have to sit there and negotiate with their abuser to end the marriage. Let's shift gears to Section 4, dividing property and debt, specifically through equitable distribution. So, Pennsylvania is what lawyers call an equitable distribution state. Now, you really need to understand that equitable means fair, but it does not automatically mean a perfectly equal 50-50 split. A judge is going to look at 11 different statutory factors to decide what's fair. We're talking about things like the length of the marriage, the age and health of both of you, and your future earning capacities. To put that in perspective, if one spouse sacrificed their own career to stay home and raise the kids for 20 years, a judge might actually award them, say, 60% of the marital estate, just to ensure they have long-term financial stability. But to divide up the pie, you first have to figure out what's actually in the pie, right? This is why your exact separation date matters so much. Every single dollar you earned and every asset or debt you took on between your wedding day and that separation date is marital property. On the flip side, separate property like inheritances, stuff you owned before the wedding, or the money you earned after that separation date, that stays strictly yours. But here's a wild little exception. If you owned a separate asset, let's say a house, before the marriage, and it goes up in value during the marriage, that specific increase in value? Yep, that's actually considered marital property. And finally, we arrive at Section 5, support and child custody, where we'll unpack the formulas and factors. When it comes to child custody, Pennsylvania rigidly sticks to one gold standard, the best interests of the child. Recently, they streamlined their evaluation factors under the 2025 Act 11. Courts are going to look at stability, sibling ties, how willing you are to co-parent, but under the new rules, they are absolutely mandated to heavily prioritize child safety and protection above everything else. They will scrutinize any history of violent behavior or involvement with child protective services. And just to be perfectly clear, there is absolutely zero gender preference in Pennsylvania custody decisions. None. Okay, let's talk about financial support between spouses and how it builds chronologically, because it happens in 3 distinct phases. From the exact moment you physically separate until a divorce complaint is actually filed, the higher earner might be paying what's called spousal support. Then, once that complaint is filed, it converts to alimony pendente light, or APL for short. The whole point of APL is just to equalize resources, giving the lower earning spouse the funds to actually litigate the divorce fairly. Finally, after the final decree is signed, the court might award discretionary post-divorce alimony, but that's really strictly based on absolute financial necessity. Now, for those temporary interim support phases, so spousal support and APL, the system is incredibly mathematical. It is literally just a formula. The court takes 33% of the higher earner's net income and then subtracts 40% of the lower earner's net income. That's your monthly payment. If the couple has kids, the formula drops to 25% and 30% just to account for the fact that child support is also being paid. It's totally numbers-driven, which actually strips away a lot of the nasty, subjective arguments. Speaking of kids, child support is always calculated first, before any spousal support even enters the picture. PA uses what's called the income shares model. This basically combines both parents' net incomes to make sure the children get the exact same proportion of income they would have enjoyed if the family was still living together. Then, that amount is split proportionally between the parents. It even includes an automatic downward adjustment if the paying parent has the child for 40% or more of the year's overnights. And this is a great feature. The law actually protects a $550 monthly self-support reserve. That ensures a low-income paying parent isn't pushed into absolute destitution just to pay a support order. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really think about this one thing. The date you legally separate is arguably the most powerful pivot point in this entire process. I mean, the very moment of your final separation legally stops the clock on accumulating marital property, and it starts the clock on that 1-year waiting period for a unilateral divorce. So how will defining and proving that specific date shape your legal footing moving forward? It is quite literally the bedrock of your financial future. Thank you so much for walking through this roadmap with me today. And